Also remember, and let us recognize this, the continued reluctance of the Indian middle class as far as municipal self-government is concerned is an important function. Whether they are corporates or the elite classes, people are not very enthusiastic about elected municipal bodies. So much so, the Jamshedpur residents, when called upon by the Supreme Court, said, "We don't want an elected municipality. We'll be very happy to be looked after by Tatas. We don't want voting powers. We don't want to pay taxes either." So I'm afraid there is a serious political problem. And if you don't face that political problem, and if the political spectrum is not prepared to face that particular problem, the rest of it, I would very respectfully submit, may satisfy us as professionals to produce some more manuals on capacity building, but whose capacity, is not at all very clear. So I feel that these basic questions need to be addressed. I will make my comments later on as far as metropolitan management is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for that reality check. And now we have Professor Subhashish Gangopadhyay. This view.
Thank you, Mr. Bhal. First, I must say that when I got the paper yesterday and I read it, and I was really worried as to what discussions I will do, because there is nothing in the paper that I disagree with. But on the other hand, I will take off from what Mr. Shiva Ramakrishnan just said, because I seriously think that there is an issue here in terms of what we need to do. We all know that cities are indeed the engines of growth. We also know that much of the GDP is in the cities, and this is not just for India, it is throughout the world. And when it comes to delivery of services, it's always easier to deliver them in densely packed spaces rather than in spaces which are more widespread. So all of these are well-known facts. We also know what we need to do. I guess the real question to ask is, why are they not getting done? And it is in that context I'm going to make some observations. As academics, we do very silly things. So one of the silly things that I did some time ago was pass out a questionnaire among the faculty and students, right? And ask them two simple questions. One was, who was the mayor of New York? And the other is, name, in two parts, name one city whose mayor's in India, whose mayor's name you know, and what is the name of the mayor. Right? An overwhelming 70% and more, 70+%, could answer the question on the New York mayor, right? And less than 2% knew of a mayor in any city in India. I think that gives you an idea of what we are expecting to do, right? And where is the political process by which it will get done. I'm afraid that in India, we do not have a shortage of brain power when it comes to anything that is non-political, especially, as you said, the professional people, they believe that, oh, that is politics, I'm not into politics, not realizing that in a democracy, every single individual has to be a politician, right? Otherwise, we are not going to bring about the changes that we are trying to do. Now, in this context, I want to raise an issue that is, whenever we talk of cities, and even today when we are talking of building new cities in a new state, we are talking of Singapore, we are talking of Shanghai, none of these two countries or these states or these cities are really democratically run in the way that we expect our cities to be run. So even in the examples that we choose, we are professionals, do not do our homework to dig deep into the process, right? We look at the outcomes and we say those are the outcomes we want to reach, but we do not worry about the processes that lead to those outcomes. In this context, I want to mention another city which I have not heard being discussed in India at all, which is the city of Bilbao, which went through phenomenal transformations in 2 decades, very much like Singapore did in 3 decades, say. But that city has a democratic process that we are trying to get in India. But we don't take that example. Right? In spite of what Rajat said about local context, right? I must say that since we are used to looking outside for answers, we might as well at least look at answers that are more feasible in our political process than answers which are not. Now, why am I making such a big point of this? I'm making such a big point of this because our focus as professionals is, as I said, to get the outcomes. So whenever we talk of, transforming cities, what do we talk about? We talk about roads, and I'm willing to lay a bet that you cannot show me one plan anywhere done which talks of sidewalks. Right? We build road after road after road after road. We calculate, we allot money to build these roads. No sidewalks. Even in Delhi, which has more cars than 3 or 4 metropolitan towns in India put together, we still have a majority of the people without cars. Even in Delhi, we do not have walkways. I'm not talking of crossing from one side to the other, which is a much more sophisticated, refined way of thinking. Even the simple thing of walking on the same side of the road, the same side that I am, we cannot do that in Delhi. And nobody thinks about it. And this is the essence of our problem. We are so focused on growth that we forget that cities are civilizations where people live. In fact, what was so special in Bilbao was the top, on the top of their list was not roads, was not public transport, which also should be very high up on the priority listing, but was something they called spaces. Essentially, the minister mentioned Barcelona. What is so special about Barcelona? In the evenings, you find all 3 generations, grandparents, parents, and children out onto the streets. That's city life. That is how livelihoods are maintained. That's why the city never sleeps. And that's why people want to belong to the city. If we want to build up a democratic process in a city, then people in the city must want to belong to the city. The city cannot just be a place of work. Right? How many people in Delhi attracts people from all over the country? Right? How many of you, and I'm willing to take a survey in this room itself, right? People who are working here are building homes back in their hometowns. That means you still don't think you belong to the city. It's a place of work. It's a place of producing GDP and your own income. Now we have to stop thinking of cities like that. If we want to transform cities, we have to start with the process that cities are places where people want to live. From that comes everything else. Livelihood, work, designing the city, architecture, everything comes from there. So that is one thing I do want to stress, because everything that Mr. Ramachandran mentioned is indeed true. But let us not address those problems by saying, therefore, capacity building, therefore, let's have this committee, that planning structure, this planning structure, which is what we tend to do. And that is, obviously we tend to do that because we think politics is not for us and we are experts and professionals. Right? These two have to come together. Again, in academia, we say that 90% of the work is in formulating the problem. And only 10% is in its actual solution. Why? Because if you train people, right, and India has no dearth of brain power, then they will be able to solve the problem that you give them. But the most important thing is to formulate the problem. Similarly, when we are doing policy making, right, I believe that the most important thing is the approach to policy. Why are we making this policy? It is not because we think we are smart and we can give you a better life. It has to be that, okay, if this is the better life you want, how can we get there? So I would strongly say we have a new opportunity now, because I'm happy that the urban local bodies are not very strong. So therefore we do not have the structure in place. We can build it the way we want to do it. So it's, we have more or less a clean slate. It is a huge opportunity for us to start, thinking of cities as a place where people live and belong. And in this context, I want to just say one thing, because one experiment hopefully is happening. I don't know how it will work out, because I don't know the ideology which is pushing it. But certainly in Delhi, there is talk about Mohalla politics. I'm going to study it very, very seriously and deeply, because that would be an experiment of how or whether it can be done, right? What I'm saying is something that is an alternative. I don't know if it will work in India. Again, I go back to what Rajat said. I think it's very true that we should be trying to solve our own problems, right? And that will have their own solutions. We can look at other countries to, learn something, of course, but it doesn't mean that we can take that solution and implement it here. And I'm sure that what is going to happen in Delhi may not be implementable in Kolkata. The reason why I say this is because, Mr. Ramachandran mentioned West Bengal and Kerala. Indeed, these are two good examples where decentralization has taken place. But if you look at the outcomes, they're very, very different. Right? Certainly nobody staying in West Bengal would say, wow, what decentralization, thanks to the 74th Amendment. Right? So I don't think that will happen. I am willing to lay a bet on it. Right? So again, because we are just following through these processes written down by experts and professionals without understanding why these are necessary and who decides what is to be done. Stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your, as usual, enlightening remarks. Sitting next to you, I'm also reminded of a query by a student of economics to his professor. How come, professor, the questions always remain the same? Governance, capacity building, administrative reforms. And his sweet reply is the answers only which change. The questions always are the same. So now I throw it up, yeah, ma'am, we throw it up for discussions, and will you get the mic to ma'am?
Thank you. I just want to focus the discussion on the relative role of the center, the state governments and local governments. I think recognizing what Mr. Sivaramakrishna has said, that there is a huge overarching political problem which we are all familiar with, and we should begin to address that, talk about that, and that is one dimension. But what we want to get out of all the wisdom present in this room is, what is the relative role of the center and the state governments? We all know that local governments need hand-holding. Until we build their capacity, until we put the various things in place, we also know that JNNURM was put together with a great deal of expectation that the center would give a nudge to the state governments to do reforms and give funding in partnership with the 3 tiers. But there were problems. And at the real political level, the reform agenda could not drive the funding. Now we are at a point where a new urban development program is coming up. We are all, there is a consensus on decentralization at the 3rd tier in principle. But it has taken us 50 years before we are talking of cooperative federalism between the center and the states. Maybe it'll take us another 20 years before we talk of cooperative federalism going all the way to the 3rd tier. Until then, how can we kickstart the process which delivers services? What role can the center play, and how can we get the not so progressive state governments to create an enabling environment to do the same what a handful of state governments have shown they can do in the last 10 years. And this question is not just to the 2 people sitting or 3 people sitting on the dais, but to the audience in general. I thought I'll just pose this so that in the discussion we can focus on this aspect.
Thank you, ma'am, for putting it in a very proper perspective. And now we have Dr. Mohanty, who's seen it all, done it all, from both sides. So
I think what Dr. Ramchandran has pointed out, one very important thing, I think the crux of the problem is not like how a mohalla